Everyone has some sort of a closet that's become too small. A closet is no place to live, and I want to support as many people as I can in stepping out of that prison into the fullness of life that's waiting for them on the other side of that closet door. I'm Nancy Shadlock from Centered Life Coaching. Join me in listening to these Coming Out Chronicles. Get curious about your story, and then see what good things are waiting for you on the other side of your closet door. Erin Baker, it's so awesome to have you on the show.
Well, thank you for being or having me on the show, I guess is what I really want to say.
Yeah, you're used to saying thanks for being on the show too.
Exactly. Like, wait, role reversal.
What is your podcast called?
It's called Life in the And it's all about playing with paradox and fluidity and all the ways in which bringing together opposites can actually help us see paths forward in life and in our businesses.
Awesome. I think we're probably going to hear a little bit of that today in your coming out story.
A little bit of that. Yes, indeed.
Who are you, Erin Baker, and what are you up to in the world?
Who am I? Well, so who am I is an ever-changing question on a daily basis. It's one of my favorite questions. Who am I in this moment, in this day? But what am I up to in this world is a lot easier to answer, which is I am a coach whose identity as a coach is changing on a regular basis. But for the most part, I work with heart-centered leaders who are creating change in the world, really change makers, troublemakers, rebels who are trying to make this world a more loving, more authentic, more inclusive place. And so I work with them on everything from getting more authentic in themselves, more inclusive of themselves, more loving of themselves, to the strategies for the impact they want to make in the world. And it's a lot of fun. And I've been doing it for a couple of years since I said came out as a coach and came out as not any longer moving up the corporate leadership ladder after spending 5 years at Facebook and Microsoft. So yeah, I'm working with people who are really trying to make a difference. And
that's awesome.
I believe they will.
Yeah, they are. So are you. So set the stage for us. What kind of coming out story do you want to tell us? And give us some background on it.
Yeah. So I think when you and I talked on Facebook about this, the big coming out story that's a little different than some of the typical ones is around gender. So that's really what I think is interesting to talk about. And it's really why I care about So I identify as non-binary in my gender, which is a very confusing thing to myself, to everybody else in the world. And what it boils down to is that from the time I was able to walk, basically, or aware of being a human, I was aware that something was off with my gender. I felt like not just your average tomboy, but actually felt a little bit more like, wait a sec, wasn't I supposed to be born a boy? But then as I grew up, I was like, no, I don't want to be a boy, but this girl thing doesn't work either. And so what I ended up feeling was there's something totally wrong with me, and spending most of my childhood trying to figure out, how do I fit into this box they call female? Because I clearly don't want to be a guy. So, and I didn't even know that there was a such thing when I was much younger as, transgender or transitioning. But then as I, tried to fit myself in this female box, it felt weirder and weirder. And so over time, what I came to realize is these boxes are arbitrary. And these boxes don't have to be where I play. And that's confusing because the world likes to know who they're talking to, right? We have this innate need to feel safe. And one of the ways we feel safe is to be understanding of who the person is in front of us. Are they man or woman? Are they tall or short? Are they whatever it is, right?
Rich, poor. Yeah.
Rich, poor, right? But gender is one of the first visual cues. And especially because there's some safety concern about, am I safe being in a certain location with someone who might not be my same gender or sex, really sex? We want to know. We want to feel safe. So my problem is I fluctuate. Problem. I'm going to use that in quotes. Problem. I fluctuate between some days I'm like the most masculine feeling person. In fact, to the point where sometimes I'm like, ooh, what would it be like to like walk around in the world as a guy, right? And then there's days where I'm like, nope, I am a female. I was born female. I am soft. I am compassionate. I am all these things. And it moves. And so one of the reasons I have now chosen to identify in this non-binary way is I don't know how to define my gender on a daily basis. I don't even know how to define my gender on a moment-to-moment basis. And I think there are a lot of people in the world who don't fit in these boxes, but haven't been given the opportunity to understand they don't have to.
Right.
So my coming out story really is, it was 15 years ago when I learned this term. I think it was about 2000, might have been 2006. So 14 years ago, where I learned that there was an option. But I didn't do anything about it then. And the reason I didn't do anything about it then is I had just come out as, attracted to women. And that enough was like stepping out of society, right? That was already taking some big risks and some big leaps. And
especially then,
right? This was well before gay marriage was a thing. I mean, I think gay marriage was a thing in Canada, but definitely not in the US. In fact, I think it was 2004 when my state, which I was in Michigan at the time, banned gay marriage. And I came out, I think, end of 2004, early 2005, something like that, 2005. So, I'd already kind of stepped out, and I was already, having spent most of my life feeling different. I had really wanted to fit in. I had been bullied. The last thing I was going to do was add a layer of complexity to who I was. And at the time, I didn't really know how to live in that space. Like, what would it mean? There were in 2006, when I first learned of non-binary, there were terms for, third pronouns, but it wasn't they, them at the time. It was more popular was Z, here, I think. And what does that mean about your body, all that? So I just let it be. And I let it be. And I continue to let it be. But what was really apparent to me, and it started back in 2006, was my sense of my gender around male, female also correlated to my sense of my body. And when I went through puberty, I grew fairly large female breasts. And I looked at them, and I would literally look down at them and be like, those things are so alien to me. Like, they just don't fit. And they don't fit how I see myself in this sort of in-between body. I don't have any attachment to them. I don't find them attractive. I just didn't like them. And back in 2006, the idea of having them removed was in my mind, but I wasn't like, I knew one person who'd had it done, and to me it just looked funny. And so I was like, no, I don't want to do that. But as time went on and I sat with it, the more I looked at my body and went, I am so disconnected from my body because of this thing. Like, I am just, I wouldn't look in the mirror. I wouldn't look down. I felt uncomfortable in swimwear. And so I just started getting more and more uncomfortable. And was about 3 years ago that I, interestingly enough, ended up hiring a coach for totally not gender related reasons. She invited me to a retreat in Mexico. And that retreat was for cisgender heterosexual ladies. And I asked her, she knew I was, having some thoughts around my gender. And she said, well, come anyway. And so I trusted her and I showed up at the retreat and I decided that was my retreat where I was going to make a decision. And the decision was there were 3 options. There was do nothing, which was what I had done for 10 years. It was have a complete, double mastectomy or have a reduction. And those cisgender heterosexual ladies convinced me that the most me thing I could do was go a full-on double mastectomy. And they became like some of my best friends in the world and were the biggest supports. But it was so wonderful to really spend time. I got quiet. I was in Mexico on a beach, really thinking about, okay, who am I pleasing if I don't do this? And what's more important, my happiness or fitting in to some weird construct in society? And yes, there are safety concerns. There are places I won't go because of my gender. But when I thought about it, most of the ways that I couldn't travel were already because I had short hair and looked queer. Adding the only thing now is if I go into a women's restroom, I don't have the chest to point people to go, I'm allowed to be here. Right. So 2 years ago, I had the surgery and it was like I woke up in my body. Wow. It was just incredible. And people saw me afterwards and said, this is how we've always seen you. How do we not notice? It wasn't just about my clothes fit better, but it wasn't just about that. It was just like, I could look at myself and go, that's not weird. That's normal. That's me. And so I really that was the time I told everybody on Facebook I was having the surgery. I answered a whole bunch of questions. And that was really the first time I said to the world, hey, like I'm non-binary and this is what it means to me. But it's still a process of coming out. How was it received? Oh, incredibly. My network is a nice little bubble. My parents, my mom and her husband were probably, and they were supportive, but they were probably the least supportive. And it was mostly because they didn't understand and they were worried. And so if that's the worst, think about what I had as the best, right? Which was my mother-in-law came out. My mom physically could not be with me. So my mother-in-law came out and took care of me during the surgery. I had my team, I was still working in corporate at the time, sent me treats. And everybody at work, except for my boss, knew exactly what surgery I was having and why. And the only reason I didn't tell my boss is none of his business. And everybody on Facebook was just super, super excited and said, this is you and we support you. And what was so surprising to me is how many people were willing to understand, how many people were willing to ask questions and find out what it meant to me, and just how important it is and how impactful it is that if you love someone, you don't care. Right? If you love somebody, you don't care if they call themselves green, blue, queer, non-binary, transgender. You just love the person.
I've been struggling with that phrase lately, like, because Glennon Doyle talks about that in Untamed, about like when you come out to parents and they say like, I'll love you no matter what, and like, I don't care what you are, but like, also, don't you want them to care? And
Yes.
like, so it's that like
And
double-edged thing of like, I don't care, but also, yeah, like I really want you to be in your own skin. And
well, yeah, and I should phrase that better. They don't care and they care. This is a great and, right? It's not just people saying whatever, do your thing. It's like, wow, good for you. I care. I support you. And I think this is just me speculating, but I think the more out I am in my world, the more I give people permission to be them.
Totally.
Right. And so, and especially when it's something like at this point in time, coming out as anywhere in the like queer part and the sexuality side of things is more normal, right? I mean, it's not normal everywhere, but it's more normal. Coming out as non-binary is a sort of new thing and considered in some cases, I don't think it's braver, but some people see it as braver. I see it all as brave, to be honest. And so I think there's an allowance for ways for people to explore who they are and how they're different in ways they haven't thought of before.
Yeah, I'm coming to think more and more that like sexuality is just a spectrum and gender is totally a spectrum. I have another friend that has a podcast called 50 Shades of Gender.
Nice.
And so it's like, yeah, like there's so many different things. And so as you step out and share your reality of who you are, you're empowering others to be like, oh, what would I like to play in? And like, how would I like to express myself in a little bit different way? Not be stuck in the binary.
And I love that the non-binary piece of things, because this is not another box to be put into. I have so many friends, colleagues who identify as non-binary, and we're all so freaking different from each other, right? And part of the thing that kept me from coming out for a while, which like in retrospect feels a little silly, was that I was like, well, I'm not non-binary enough.
I don't want to be like those non-binary people.
Or I don't like, I had a friend who was also coming out as non-binary, and I had this image of that's what it means to be non-binary. And at the time, and even up until very recently, which is why we decided to have this podcast, is I was still using she, her pronouns. And in my head, I didn't qualify to be non-binary if I was still using she, her pronouns, which is in like, again, retrospect, not true, silly. There is no pronoun that you're supposed to use to be non-binary. There's no level of masculinity or femininity that you're supposed to have if you're non-binary. There really is no way. I have friends who identify as non-binary who you'd walk up to them and go, that person, totally male, right? Or same thing, totally female. That's all it is a, hey, don't make assumptions about me based on what you see. There's no one way to be non-binary, and it's just, and like my way of being non-binary shifts too, right? On a daily basis, mostly. And so, yeah, as of late, I have now more recently come out as saying, you know what, I am using both she, her pronouns and they, them. And the way I feel about it is both are great. I get tickled when people remember the they, them, but both are great. I'm not really ready to get 100% on the they, them train. But what's great about it is one of the ways in which I feel non-binary is an advantage. I'm going to use advantage, but I think everybody can do this, is I feel like I'm given more permission to be fluid and changing. Like, it's okay that I've decided now to do they, them, and it would be okay tomorrow if I said, no, never mind. Or actually, let me play with he, him, you know, like there's somehow we as society have given permission to the people who identify as fluid to be fluid while not allowing the rest of us to be just as fluid in our identities.
Right. It's a title. If you have that title, you're okay too. But
Yeah,
the rest
you're
of us
okay. You're okay to be fluid, right? And
Mhm.
I think it's even easy for me to give myself permission to be fluid in my gender and to forget that it's okay to be fluid in the rest of my identity.
Like what?
Anything I might think of myself. Fluid is in my identity as a coach, for instance. I've been playing a lot with this concept of, people get identified in a box as I'm a leadership coach, or I coach entrepreneurs, or I am a blah, blah, blah coach. And
My
like
coming out coach.
coming out coach, right?
I know. I feel like that's too narrow for me too. Like I
And it's
don't know how.
okay to be that in any moment and be different. And so I've been thinking about my own business lately and thinking about, well, okay, let me look at who I'm actually serving versus who I say I'm serving, and who's lighting me up, and what is my business really about. And there's a part of me that's like, no, you're supposed to be consistent. You have to have a brand, and that's how you're going to be successful, which is, in some ways, there's truth to it because people want to know who they're working with, right? And then there's a part of me that's like the little rebel being, what if there's some sort of non-binary version of being a coach?
Amazing.
And what if it's fun for people not to be able to pinpoint me, but just know that they really want to work with me?
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm starting to think about, how is this being fluid in my gender? And that's where the idea of and came from, right? Where is this being an and in gender actually a superpower in so many other ways? And how can I give myself, but how can we all give ourselves permission to be fluid?
That's amazing.
And to not fit in any box, because society just loves those boxes.
Yeah. And they're boring.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
Like I would say I started playing with gender fluidity even as a kid. Like I often had short hair, boy cut. Like I often got mistaken as a boy, and then like tried to like ramp up my femininity as I grew older, because I was like, I'm a girl, I gotta play this up. And something that really helped me realize I could play with the different options is taking voice lessons. And so like I have a pretty deep voice naturally, and I would be ashamed of it because I'm like, oh, it's too masculine. I got to learn how to sing higher. And whenever I'd go high, it would be like really airy and like not me. And so I went to this amazing voice coach that helped me work through how to bring some of like the richness and the depth of my low voice, my chest voice, up into my head voice, and make it so there wasn't like this big distinctive switch, and bring continuity to it all. So there was strength up in the higher register too. And it was so cool to play with that and to recognize that like all of me is okay and I have all these options. And that started playing out in my sexuality and my gender, I think, a bit too. And yeah, even just my haircut, right? Like I've got like short on one side and long on the other, and just playing with it all. So I like it.
Right? Yeah. And I think we're all fluid in all of those ways, right? And I think it's fun to be surprising. Like I when you're talking about voice, I sing, and someone recently said something about how surprised they were by my upper register. And it's because there's an expectation, right? Oh, I don't have as deep a voice as you do, but I do have a deeper voice. And there's an expectation of then how that shows up. And so it's kind of fun when you can show up and surprise people with, in some ways, this is a gendered expectation.
Yeah.
Right. And I sing like a girl a lot. That's okay.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I just think, what if we just continue to interrupt people's patterns and play with just who we are and lean into it's okay to be unpredictable and it's not unsafe.
Yeah. Yeah. Keeping people on their toes.
Yeah.
And like you said, giving people permission too.
Yeah.
For themselves.
Yeah. And something that I've also learned, speaking of coming out, something I have noticed is, first of all, now that I have been out, people are curious if things are evolving. So a couple people said to me when I said I'm moving towards they, them pronouns, they said, "Oh, I've been wondering for a while." And these are people who were with me on the journey 2 years ago where I said I'm still she, her. And so there's this interesting piece of like, you're always coming out even to the people that you've come out to keep them apprised of like, people want to hear how you're evolving and people want to be respectful of how you're evolving. And so that was a really interesting lesson for me because I just assumed people saw 2 years ago I was she, her, and they weren't wondering about it or worrying about it. And yet here are all these people who've come to me being like, "Oh, thank you for telling me." It's been on my mind and I haven't known how to ask.
Yeah, people don't know how to. Like, we're starting to normalize it maybe with putting our pronouns in our email signatures or LinkedIn profiles, but it's still a little bit of a awkward, like, will I offend you if I ask what your pronouns are? Or are you wishing that I would ask you what your pronouns are?
Right? Yeah. And it's easy to just assume that everybody knows.
But no.
Who
knows what's going on for people?
Yeah. And so I'm in some ways really happy to be someone that people do feel. I had a couple people reach out to me behind the scenes who felt safe to ask me questions. I'm glad to be that because I do know people who, and I totally respect that's how they feel. Like they're the type of people that if you don't say their pronoun correctly, it really upsets them. Right. And totally real and valid experience for them. That's not how I am. I'd much rather someone get it wrong and me be able to say something about it, or people ask me because I'd rather people ask me ignorant, quote unquote, ignorant questions than not ask at all because they're afraid.
Yeah. What do you say to people that are like, I don't understand how to use this they, them, like it feels too awkward and things?
Yeah, that was something my parents expressed, and it wasn't necessarily with just me, it was with another friend. In the time I didn't really address it, but now that's not an excuse for them to use she, her with me. So like I said, I'm both, right? I like both, but I don't want people using she, her just because they are rebelling against they, them, or it makes them uncomfortable. And so my general thought is, you know what? The definition of words, well, first of all, they, them wasn't always a plural back in the days, but the definition of words changes. Yes, it's awkward. But imagine how awkward I felt for 35 years, not being in the right, or I'm now 36, not being in the right body and not knowing how to identify. And if your discomfort in using a pronoun is that strong, then your love of me and who I am is questionable. And I wouldn't say it that way, but the idea being, right, that if you truly care about me being me, then you will handle the discomfort you feel in using a new pronoun.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if you are more interested in your own comfort, then I question our relationship.
Yeah, because then it's having no regard for your comfort for all these years.
I am not here to make people comfortable. If I wanted people to be comfortable, I would have never come out. And then I would have kept myself uncomfortable.
But you're also not someone who's just here to make yourself comfortable.
No, I'm not. I'm actually, there's a lot of discomfort in coming out. It's one of the most uncomfortable things I think you can have happen as a human, is to say, hey, I'm going to tell you I am not like the rest of you, and risk whatever consequences from, psychological consequences, physical consequences, whatever, it's definitely uncomfortable. But there's two types of uncomfortable. There's the uncomfortable that you put yourself in, risking whatever others feel about you. And there's the uncomfortable of risking what you feel about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And, we can take Glennon Doyle's quote and change it a little bit. She talks about when it comes to the option to disappoint others or disappoint yourself, it's disappoint others.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can probably figure out a way to word uncomfort, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to making yourself uncomfortable with yourself or making others uncomfortable with yourself, make others uncomfortable with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because you're the one you have to live with for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. And I have the belief that there is no 100% rejection, ostracizing, whatever you want to call it. There is no human who will be rejected by 8 billion people. So when we fear we're going to lose connection, yes, we might lose connection. And this happens with some of our closest relationships, like family, right? And at the same time, what we're truly, truly afraid of is complete and utter abandonment by everybody. And I just don't think that's possible. I think there's always going to be somebody who resonates. And in fact, the more you can be you and stand out, the more you're going to find those other people who are going, oh, I thought I was alone.
Yeah, I remember that. Like, I came out in a very religious context. And so it's like, I'm going to be totally ostracized. And then as I've come out and as I've interviewed more and more people that have a similar story, it's like all these people are coming out of the woodwork. They're like, yes, I thought I couldn't come out because it was a sin too. And here we are.
Yeah. There's a friend of mine who has this great quote about what are you willing to lose? And what she talks about is that when we're so afraid of losing, that we become afraid of losing the people that we gathered by being not us.
Say that again.
Yeah, we're afraid to lose the people that we gathered by being not us. This is my friend Varian Brandon. I want to make sure I give her credit for this. It's just profound. And she says, by doing that, we are actually not gathering people that could be around us by being us. And so what her question, which is a powerful, powerful coaching question, is what are you willing to lose? And my experience, lived experience, is the more I am willing to lose the people I gathered by being not me, the more the right people come, but also the people I gathered by being not me actually like me more.
Yeah. People,
not all of them.
Pretty good bullshit meter, most people.
Yeah. But, one of my mentors, Christina Berkeley, said something to me recently about, like, you got to just get rid of the leaves on your tree that are dead to let the new ones grow. And so it's hard, right? Because I think when we're coming out, we're afraid to lose the people that, as much as we feel like they really, really matter to us, ultimately they don't. Because if they truly mattered, they'd care about us being us.
Yeah.
And that's hard. It's hard because it's parents sometimes. It's sisters, it's brothers, it's best friends. It's like, it's
history.
Yeah. And I don't want to make light of that because that can be very painful and very hard. And I am so very lucky that I have not lost close family members. And sometimes the only way to be happy and full and you is to lose people who you care about a lot. And hopefully some of those people will come back around at some point.
Yeah. I want to ask you something on the personal side, and feel free to not answer.
Sure.
But I just wonder what it's been like for your wife to be with you along all this journey.
It's a great question. She is amazing. Um, she actually, I can't remember how long ago it was, but she expressed how excited she was for me to have surgery.
Mm.
And the reason was, I can't remember exactly how she put it, but it was, I can't love something on your body that you don't love.
Mm.
And so she always has just been, I'm so lucky with Meryl. She's just always been a super champion of me and me being me and doing what's best for me. And it's so great because there's no coming out to her ever. It's just whatever I am. Um, and none of it's selfish, right? Like I know people who have partners where this is a hard thing, right? Where the partner really likes, let's say, the feminine breasts and is sad and there's a loss. I think one thing that helps with Meryl is that she's always been in the sexuality spectrum somewhere. I think pansexual is probably the best way to describe her. And so she's never been particularly attached to what her partner's body looks like.
Mm-hmm.
She's just attached to who her partner is. And so she didn't feel it as a loss for her when I changed my body. She felt it as a gain for me and therefore a gain for her.
Mm-hmm. Because the more you're comfortable in your skin, the more your relationship probably flows better.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So like I said, her parents have been incredible. I wish there were more Meryls in the world, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because I know that's just not the case. And it's not, that's to say, I want to say this. That doesn't make other people wrong for their preferences, right? I know enough people who've been through partners transitioning for whom, okay, that is, you know what? For them, that is whatever their boundary is. And boundaries are, everybody has to have their own boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So just because Meryl's been wonderful does not mean other people who struggle with this are wrong. I want to be very clear about that.
Right.
I would struggle, I think, if I were with a partner who had a big transition. I don't know. I haven't, my wife is definitely on the female identifying side of things. So this is not a thing I have to think about, but I can't guess how I would feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And maybe I would, but I also know maybe I wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's beautiful that you've had that kind of support and love through this all.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. And she's the first one who has been, tell me if I get it wrong, if I say they, them and forget, which is really cute.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yep.
So what is your next chapter of your coming out story? Do you have anything you're leaning into or wondering about next?
Not at the moment. I would say, besides this business side of things where I'm leaning into, what if people can't pinpoint me? I like that. I think that's the big thing, but there's nothing on the like gender or sexuality side at the moment that's pinging me. It's more of leaning into, it was just a few weeks ago that I said, hey, I'm playing with they. And so I'm leaning into, does that stick?
Mm-hmm.
And it may or may not. And it's fine either way. So that's exactly where I'm playing. And maybe there's something to be said about bringing my coming out story more out into the forefront. have mixed feelings around being super, super out there.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. I'm riding the wave of whatever comes to me.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than planning.
What are the mixed emotions about it? Because I have my own mixed emotions about it, but I'd love to hear yours about being more out.
Yeah. I think for me, it's honestly, safety is a big thing. There are plenty of people in the world who still want to do harm to people in the LGBTQ community. The other piece this has been a theme for me since 2006, really, is how much do I want my identity to be revolving around my queerness?
Mm-hmm.
And so even back when 2006, I was working at the LGBT office at University of Michigan. I was thinking about, am I going to do a career working at like LGBT centers? And at some point I went, I really don't want this to be the forefront of everything I do. And so I go back and forth because I really do like working in the queer community. I love supporting people who are queer of all sorts, right? Gender and sexual queerness. But there are times when I just don't want it to be the forefront of my identity, and I don't want it to be the only thing. And so if I were to be out there more, I'd have to really be ready to own that. Like, for instance, one of my coaches, Rich Litvin, talks about if you're going to write a book, you better be willing to talk about it for 7 to 10 years after it's out, right? So am I willing to go out there and do a TED Talk or a book or whatever that I'm willing to talk about for 7 to 10 years after it's out? Not at the moment, but there's a part of me that's like, but I could do a lot of good, right? And so I'm not opposed to it. At the moment, it's sort of my whole 2020 has been great for this, but my whole mode of operating right now is leaning into what's emerging in the moment rather than planning a lot ahead. And so being fluid in my understanding of what I want to do is great, because 2 years from now, I may have a completely different opinion. I may be completely like, I don't want to talk about it at all. Or I could be like, let's go have all the talks to all the people about it.
Right. And letting yourself be fluid in it.
Exactly.
That's cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's really wonderful to hear your story.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Coming Out Chronicles. If you enjoyed it, give it a like. And if you think it would be helpful for someone else, please share it with them. If you'd like to connect with me, reach out on social. I'd love to support you on the next chapter of your coming out story. Until next time, this is Nancy Shadlock from Centered Life Coaching.